There was a time when Hywel Bennett's face carried something audiences could not easily name. It was not charm in the traditional sense, nor was it loud ambition. It was depth. A quiet gravity behind the eyes that made his performances linger long after the screen faded to black. Critics spoke of him as the next great Welsh actor, a successor to a legendary lineage that promised fame, prestige, and permanence. But then something strange happened. As the world leaned closer, trying to understand the man behind those roles, he stepped back. Interviews were declined. Appearances grew rare. Explanations never came. While others chased visibility, Hywel Bennett chose distance. While the industry tried to define him, he refused the definition. And the question remains unanswered and unsettling. What happens when a star does not disappear because he is forgotten, but because he chooses not to be understood? Hywel Bennett emerged at a moment when British cinema and television were hungry for faces that felt real. Born in Wales, he carried with him a natural intensity that did not need embellishment. His rise was not built on spectacle, but on credibility. Directors trusted him with characters who were conflicted, restrained, and emotionally complex. Audiences recognized him not as a performer who demanded attention, but as one who held it. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, his career moved steadily forward. Key roles in film and television established him as a serious actor, someone critics repeatedly described as thoughtful and uncompromising. Comparisons to Richard Burton followed him like a shadow, not because of imitation, but because both seemed to carry the weight of Wales in their voices and expressions. Awards and praise arrived quietly, without excess celebration, reinforcing the sense that Hywel Bennett was destined for something lasting. Yet beneath this carefully built image of success, there were signs the public never noticed. While fame gathered around him, something within him remained unresolved. And behind the roles that defined his reputation, a private tension was already taking shape. Long before the cameras found him, Hywel Bennett was shaped by a sense of distance from the world around him. Growing up in Wales, he developed an early awareness of observation rather than exhibition. He watched people closely. He listened more than he spoke. There was a quietness to his presence that did not suggest weakness, but concentration. Those who knew him early often recalled a young man who seemed inwardly occupied, as if part of him was always elsewhere processing something unseen. His path toward acting was not driven by a desire to be admired. It emerged instead as a way to give form to emotions he struggled to articulate in ordinary life. Performance allowed him to step into other lives without explaining his own. On stage and screen, he could express fear, restraint, conflict, and longing without ever naming them. Acting became less a pursuit of recognition and more a private language. Yet even in these early years, there were hints of the tension that would later define his life. Success arrived, but comfort did not. Each role brought clarity, but never resolution. The very sensitivity that made him compelling as an actor also made him vulnerable to the weight of expectation. From the beginning, fame was not a destination for him. It was a condition he entered reluctantly, already aware that it would demand more than he was willing to give. As Hywel Bennett's reputation grew, the industry began to ask more of him than performances alone. Success no longer meant simply inhabiting a character. It required explanation, repetition, and visibility. Interviews became expectations. Public appearances became obligations. The private interior space that had once made acting possible started to shrink under constant observation. Offers arrived from respected directors' projects that could have elevated his career into something more celebrated and secure. Yet on several occasions, he declined them. The reason he gave was never strategic or professional. He said his inner self was not ready. To the industry, this sounded unreasonable, even self-sabotaging. To him, it was a matter of survival. Each role asked him to open emotional doors he could not always close again. The camera did not simply record him, it took something from him. Fame in this sense was not intoxicating, it was invasive. The more recognition he received, the more he felt reduced to an image that did not reflect his inner reality. Relationships strained under the pressure. Privacy became a negotiation. He was constantly losing. While others learned to adapt to the rhythm of public life, Hywel Bennett resisted it quietly, refusing to reshape himself into something more manageable. The cost of fame was not a single breaking point, but a slow erosion. The very depth that made him valuable as an actor became the source of his withdrawal. And as expectations continued to rise, he began to question whether remaining visible was worth the personal toll it demanded. There was no public collapse, no headline that announced Hywel Bennett's retreat. Instead, his absence unfolded gradually, almost imperceptibly. Roles became fewer. Invitations went unanswered. The momentum that once carried his career forward began to slow, not because of rejection, but because of deliberate distance. To the outside world, it appeared as a fading presence. In reality, it was a conscious step away from a life that no longer felt sustainable. During this period, he chose isolation over explanation. Years were spent away from the industry, living in a rural setting far removed from studios and sets. This was not an act of disappearance, but a form of preservation. Without cameras, without expectations, he was no longer required to perform a version of himself that felt incomplete. The silence offered something the spotlight never had space. Those close to him spoke of an internal shift following a profound personal shock tied to the sudden loss of a fellow actor. The details were never clarified, and he never confirmed the identity involved. What mattered was not the event itself, but the aftermath. Something closed within him. Conversations narrowed. Trust in the public world weakened. Grief was carried privately without narrative, without permission for others to enter. This was not a fall defined by scandal or ruin. It was a withdrawal shaped by restraint. Hywel Bennett did not break away from fame in anger. He simply stopped moving toward it. And in that stillness, the line between actor and private man finally became firm. In the later years of his life, Hywel Bennett remained largely outside the public gaze. There were no attempts to return, no statements to clarify the past, no effort to reshape how he would be remembered. His distance from the industry had become permanent, not as a rejection of acting itself, but as a boundary he no longer wished to cross. Those who encountered him during this time often described a man who was calm, reserved, and firmly rooted in his private world. His passing did not arrive with spectacle. It was received quietly, much like the life he had chosen to live away from attention. Tributes focused on the quality of his performances rather than the mystery of his absence. As if, even in death, he resisted becoming a subject of speculation. Yet, among those closest to him, there was an understanding that his silence had been shaped by a long internal struggle. Not a single moment of collapse, but a sustained effort to protect something fragile within himself. Afterward, one detail surfaced that seemed to reflect his entire philosophy. His will was handwritten in an old form of the Welsh language, a deliberate return to origin and identity. Within it, a passage was completely crossed out in dark ink, rendered unreadable. No explanation was given. No attempt was made to recover what had been erased. It stood as a final act of control, a reminder that some truths were never meant to be shared. In that gesture, Hywel Bennett left behind not answers, but a boundary. And perhaps that boundary was his truest legacy. Hywel Bennett's story does not resolve itself into clarity. It lingers instead in contrast. On one side, there is the visible legacy of a gifted actor whose performances carry depth, restraint, and intelligence. On the other, there is a life deliberately shaped away from explanation, a refusal to turn inner experience into public property. Fame offered him recognition, but it also demanded exposure. And when that demand became too great, he chose silence over surrender. His journey invites a quieter question, one that reaches beyond celebrity. Does every public figure owe the world access to their inner life? Or is there dignity in choosing what remains unseen? In a culture that rewards constant visibility, Hywel Bennett stands as a reminder that withdrawal can be an act of integrity rather than failure. His absence was not emptiness, it was intention. If this story left something unsettled in you, perhaps that is its purpose. Remember the roles, but also respect the distance he kept. And if you believe there are more stories where light and shadow exist side by side, take a moment to share your thoughts, join the conversation, and support the channel.